I'll zoom out here a little bit so I can show you the full map here. This is the Far East and the Pacific, talking about major Japanese war objectives and planned opening attacks. And one of the things I think that gets lost in World War II, especially World War II in the Pacific, is we focus on the big battles. We focus on Pearl Harbor, Midway, Coral Sea, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Guadalcanal, Coral. I mean, we focus on all the big battles, but what we tend to forget is what that war was all about. Japan found itself in a very dire strait. They had invaded China in 1937. You can make the argument they did in 31, but let's just go with the conventional idea. They invade China in 1937, occupy all the ports, cut China off from the outside world. They then invade French Indochina in 1940. This is after France has fallen to the Nazis. This then provokes action by the United States, Great Britain, and the Dutch government in exile to cut off trade with Japan, to embargo Japan, to not export steel, not give them oil, and to freeze their bank accounts. And this economically cripples Japan. Understand, Japan gets 95% of its oil in these imports, and now all of a sudden it's cut off. I can't imagine if we had 5% of the U.S. oil cut off, how we react to that. If Canada or Mexico basically cut off our oil tomorrow, we'd be blitzkrieging our way to Mexico City and Ottawa, I'm pretty sure. But the Japanese find themselves cut off. And what they start looking to is that source of oil down here, which is the Dutch and British East Indies. There's a source right here, what they call the Southern Resource Area. And that Southern Resource Area is key for the Japanese. The whole point of the war was to gather their natural resources to make them independent of the British, the Americans, the Dutch, the French, the Australians, and secure their natural resources. And to the Japanese, I have to say this, they didn't see this as a big issue. It's colonized by the Dutch, the British, and the French. Their opinion is, well, if the British and Dutch and French can do it, why can't we do it? We'll just take it from them. And that was their objective. They were going to go in, take those natural resources to fuel their economy, complete their isolation of China, and basically get themselves what the Germans call Lebensraum, living space, to live. They already done it with Korea. They've done it with Taiwan. They've done it with Manchuria, and then they're doing it with China. So their goal is to come here. However, the Japanese realize that there's a problem. They could have defeated the British, defeated the French, defeated the Dutch with no problem and taken the Dutch East Indies. The problem they had is their entire supply line would have sailed right here past the Philippines, either to the west of it through the South China Sea or to the east of it through the Western Pacific. And the problem was the United States controlled the Philippines, they controlled Guam, they controlled Wake Island, and any passage around here would have put them within air range of American bases at Guam or the Philippines. And as America cut off the oil supply to Japan, they also reinforced the Pacific Islands. One of the things they did in the Philippines is they started stationing B-17s, these flying fortresses, these big, huge 4-engine bombers that could range out a long distance. And most importantly, the U.S. had one of the largest overseas bases for submarines. The Submarine Squadron 20 was based there on 3 submarine tenders, the Holland, the Canopus, the Otis, the rescue vessel Pigeon, and then five divisions of submarines. 4 of them made up of some of the newest submarines in the U.S. Navy. And those submarines were designed to range out from Manila Bay, from the base at Cavite, and attack shipping out here in the South China Sea and the Western Pacific. That could have strangled the Japanese as equally as not taking those areas. And so the Japanese saw no other course than to go to war against the United States, for fear that if they grab the Dutch East Indies, the British East Indies, the Americans will bottle them up. And because they didn't want to attack the Philippines directly, the biggest threat to them was the forward American base at Pearl Harbor with the U.S. Pacific Fleet, hence the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, the Japanese went in and effectively forced the Americans to abandon their base in the Philippines. This is the naval base at Cavite. One of the major targets you see the Japanese do after the attack on Pearl Harbor is they attack the American airfields. Clark Base, Air Base is destroyed. And then on December 10th, they target the main American naval base at Cavite, which means the squadrons of American submarines have to leave. They basically have to relocate. And what they do is they relocate to Western Australia. And that brings us back over to here. to this image right here. During World War II, American submarines out of Fremantle penetrated the Dutch, what was called the Dutch barrier here, the East India barrier, and got in here to attack shipping all the time. The Fremantle submarines were some of the most effective submarines in the U.S. Pacific Fleet, also suffered some of the most casualties, but they were extremely effective. They were able to get into the South China Sea, into the Dutch East Indies, into the Western Pacific, and attack. And especially in these little narrow choke points between Luzon and Taiwan, through the shipping here, across the parcels and all the island bases the Chinese have now fortified, they're able to get in there and interdict supplies. One of the reasons that Japan surrendered in September of 1945 isn't because we dropped nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's only a part of the element there. Japan was surrounded. We'd mined their waters. We'd cut them off with the obtaining of Okinawa. We'd cut all their supply lines off when we landed in the Philippines in October of 1944. We ranged out there. Japan was starving. It was running out of food, running out of fuel. Add to it, the Soviets come barreling through Manchuria and Korea. U.S. forces were literally steaming off the coast, bombarding planes overhead. The Japanese realized that they were strangled. That was actually the name of the operation that was undertaken, Operation Strangulation. They were strangled out